Perfectly happy with the person I am and I've always been. I don't pay my telephone bills on time, and I don't write my mother as many letters as I should. There are all kinds of things I can improve about myself, but a weirdo knows I feel good about myself. I'm happy with myself.
It's no secret that there were, and now women, that are attracted to Ted Bundy, from his looks, his characteristics, and his crimes, of what he's done. When we pick through Ted's love life through the years when he was with us, we find many different situations, but little that we can pinpoint to be true or not true in Ted's love life. But the big puzzle piece was Ted's broken heart, the fire that lit the wick to the candle for his crazed behavior towards women. This is a look at Ted Bundy's love life, and maybe the biggest part of Ted that was compartmentalized for only him to know the true secrets about. When digging our way into Ted's love life, there's elements that we know to be true and maybe a little embellished. There's many stories from whispers of one-night stands that were just casual get-togethers, or maybe even more from women at local bars around the places where Ted was living, from Seattle to Utah. As Ted's fame grew, women were coming out of the woodwork saying they had relations with Ted. Nothing violent, just two adults, both consenting. We even know that Ted went on a date with a lady that lived across the hall from him, in the same building he lived in, across the street from Florida State University, just days before he went on his last rampage. It might be the most interesting part about Ted, besides the brutality that he unleashes on women. It's the fact that Ted is looking for love and companionship through most of his life, while free or incarcerated. He doesn't seem to have trouble with finding someone throughout his life, with having a relationship. In fact, once Ted starts dating women, there's not a lot of time between all of Ted's girlfriends. As he loses one, he finds another. But before the world even knows that Ted is guilty of the crimes he's been accused of, many people, especially women, are doubting that Ted could have anything to do with these murders he's being accused of. When Ted is having his first big court case in Florida, the courtroom, outside of the courtroom, outside of the courthouse, and many, many letters of women wanting to have a relationship with him. He seems dangerous. He seems mysterious. He's well educated, well spoken. He seems to have a plan for his life. The first person we know that Ted really showed his romantic side with is Diane Edwards. Diane came from a family that did well for themselves, and many think this is what attracted Ted to Diane more than anything. She had status, she had nice clothes, she was well known, she fit the look of an important person's wife in the future, which is what Ted wanted and needed if he was going to have a career in politics or law. When Ted actually talks about Diane, it's mostly positive. He says he felt love towards her. They spent most of their time driving around, holding hands, finding empty parking lots to where they could kiss and laugh. They whispered sweet compliments in each other's ear and told each other how much they loved the other one. Ted says he was smitten with Diane and that he was truly in love. Many historians of Ted believe that Diane was the woman that Ted lost his virginity to, sealing the deal with Ted falling romantically in love with her, but later on feeling the pain of rejection. Two major feelings that united in Ted's mind, as Ted found himself still in school, working low-paying jobs, trying to figure out his future, and focusing most of his attention on Diane, as a young man will do, being madly in love for the first time. He says in the interview that he could tell that Diane was wanting more for her life, but Ted, he couldn't provide her with what she wanted financially. Diane herself says years later, she found Ted to be a lot more emotional than she was capable of handling. But when Diane moves away to take a job in San Francisco, she would eventually break up with Ted in the end. Ted fully admits, "I had this overwhelming feeling of rejection, this pain and anger. I began to get the desire of some sort of revenge on Diane." What many people will experience in life, the feeling of a broken heart. Some cry, some move on, but Ted seemed to have found lust for vengeance. With the breakup with Diane, we see it did two major things for Ted. At the time, it did make him focus on his future, pushing his way through school and working, graduating with a psychology degree. But also, this anger Ted felt from the breakup, it festered inside of him and attached itself to a secret and desire Ted was living with for many years. Ted's secret was that he was attracted to violence with women, and on top of that, compounding it with the obsession with necrophilia. And with Ted, as everything builds, it seems to be the perfect mix. When Ted is single, going into 1969, he was doing well. He was focused on his future, but still struggling with his secret and wanting a partner. Although, he knows he can't just do this with anybody he's with. But Ted finds what may be the person he would have married if he had went down a different path. The story of Liz and Ted finally meeting in 1969, downtown Seattle, at the Sandpiper Tavern. This is a different Ted that we start to hear about and coming into contact with, really learning more about Ted himself. It's a Ted that's more assertive and knows what he wants and what he's doing, and slowly making up his mind about what he's going to be doing in the future. Liz is at the tavern that night with a friend. It's not long after she's there that she sees Ted in the background, sitting by himself at a table. She says she's immediately attracted to him by his looks, and soon enough they bump into each other. They drink together, they dance, and they talk most of the night. Liz says she's far too drunk to drive home that night, so Ted takes her back to her house late into the night, their first night of meeting, talking, and trusting one another. Liz says he seems safe and trustworthy to spend the night with. It's a true testimony of the lure of the number one weapon Ted had when it came to women, that he's trustworthy. He doesn't look like a stranger. Liz that night allowed Ted into her life while she knew she had a child at home asleep. It's truly remarkable and just another unbelievable part of Ted's story. He didn't even try to kiss Liz that night. He didn't offer to take off her clothes. He simply laid down with her in her bed, and they slept peacefully right next to each other. When Liz awakes in the morning, Ted's already woken up, getting up Molly, Liz's young daughter. They're making breakfast. Liz says when she comes to the kitchen, she sees Ted and Molly laughing, talking, and from that moment, Liz is head over heels for Ted. He took her breath away. Liz and Molly become a huge part of Ted's story. Still to this day, they build remarkable stories with Ted, and weird ones as well. Stories that will come out of their relationship with Ted, but it's obvious that something was different with Liz and even Molly, that Ted was obviously not targeting them. He looked at Liz in a romantic way, and they truly became a small family together for a short time, and Ted even becoming somewhat of a stepfather to young Molly. But obviously, there's many secrets that are about to be unraveled with Ted. Ted and Liz seemed to be a match made in heaven. All that Liz knew is that Ted was educated, well-spoken, and was polite with manners. Really a gentleman. He loved her unconditionally with her daughter. It was just the three of them sharing life together. Ted had big plans for his future. In the first couple of years, Ted and Liz are inseparable, and Liz says Ted is romantic and sweet. No signs of anything weird going on with Ted, just a normal guy who's driven and loves the person he's with. Ted and Liz seem to be a match made in heaven. All that Liz knows at the time is that Ted was educated, well-spoken, was polite to all, had manners for women, and seems to love her and her daughter unconditionally, and in the beginning, always be there. The relationship that Ted has with Liz and Molly, who he calls Monkey, is just another sad part of the story, making Liz and Molly victims themselves. Ted and Liz don't seem to fight too much, as Liz says. It seems that Ted is more the emotional one than Liz. Ted is essentially raising Molly, helping her with her homework, teaching her how to ride a bike, and playing with her, building a bond, a strong one. Liz is absolutely in heaven and feels like the luckiest woman in the world. But as the years continue and Ted and Liz find themselves in 1973, Liz can see and hear something different in Ted. He's not as calm as he once was, picking more fights. He's more irritable when she brings up getting married, seeming to always make an argument and storming out of the house. What Liz and Molly don't know about Ted is that he's coming unraveled at the seams. In 1973, as Ted starts going out with days that are supposed to be spent at work or with friends, Ted is actually out stalking women, following them, peeking in their windows, watching certain ones. It starts off so simple, as Ted says. What Liz does notice from Ted is that he's been pushing himself away, not mentally connected, but still says he's madly in love with Liz, and loves and cares for Molly, and talks about the future. Liz just seems to think that Ted is going through a moment, and he'll find his way out of it. Liz and Molly share their own weird moments with Ted, different experiences that they really don't relate to the other one until years later. Liz says one time, as they were tubing in a river, Ted jumped on Liz and held her underwater for quite some time. When he finally let her go and she came up, she was irate. She said Ted was just weird. Molly had a scary part of Ted show itself to her. She said that her trust and bond had been broken with Ted. Later in their relationship, when Ted came over one day and asked Molly, "Do you want to play hide and go seek?" So Molly agreed. As Ted went to go hide, Molly counted. When she was done counting, she went and looked for Ted, but she saw him in the middle of the room under a blanket. When she pulled the blanket off of Ted, Ted was completely naked. Molly screamed and said, "What are you doing?" in just a curious way. Ted explained that he couldn't be seen, but this was a strong indication that Ted was messing around with Molly and testing to see what she would do. In the start of 1974, something happens that shakes the community that Liz lives in. First, a young girl is attacked and almost murdered, and not long after that, another young girl disappears in her bed in the middle of the night, just blocks away from where Liz lives. Liz is extremely scared and upset of the situation that's unfolding in her own neighborhood. As Ted comes over from his own apartment that morning, and he sees Liz reading the newspaper about the disappearance, Ted tries to calm her down, but also saying, "You have to be careful and be aware." Ted was wanting to hear what Liz was thinking about the situation, and telling Liz that she needs to change the back door locks. They're not strong enough, just in case, to be safe. It's not so much believed that Ted has fallen out of love with Liz, and as he continues on a week by monthly basis to kidnap, he starts to draw attention to himself. The story would go that Ted would have so much heat on him that he would eventually make up a story that he wanted to move to Utah and attend law school. When Liz asked if she could come, Ted said, "You're more than welcome to, if you want." Very nonchalant to Liz. It's obvious that Ted has become so obsessed with murdering women, he doesn't want to let go of Liz, but he wants to be on his own to continue what he's doing. So by October of 1974, Ted's in Utah, and he continues to murder women. He's still writing to Liz, calling her here and there. Ted comes back to see Liz in December of 1974, and they take this picture right here as a family. Just 2 weeks before this photo, Ted had kidnapped and murdered Deborah Kent after he failed with taking Carol DeRanch. But in this photo, Liz is having extreme anxiety because that she suspects that Ted might be responsible for all the women disappearing, and she's contacted the authorities without Ted knowing of it. Liz is still very suspicious and fights with herself that maybe this is all a coincidence. Not wanting to give up Ted, she's still in love with him and she wants a future with him. Something else happened in 1974. Ted would keep another secret from Liz. Ted met a woman while working at the Department of Emergency Services. Her name was Carol Ann Boone. But with that summer of '74 and at the emergency center, and Ted even helping in the search of a couple of the missing women that he was responsible for, he was also building a relationship that would pick back up years down the road. But Ted is back in Utah, and this is when many whispers start to emerge later while Ted is on trial, that when he was in Utah, Colorado, Ted was also meeting women for casual get-togethers and one-night stands that would later come out from women contacting news articles, pleading that Ted was innocent. But one thing is for certain, is that while Ted was away from Liz, he was still murdering and searching for every opportunity he could walk himself into. But in August of 1975, Ted will be arrested and identified by Carol DeRanch. As it goes to court, he's in constant communication with Liz. She's by his side, confused, and now taking up for him. There's even a moment in 1975, a small window. He goes back to live with Liz and Molly, like nothing's ever happened. He's been bailed out by his parents and awaiting trial. When he arrives at Liz's home, Molly will even ask Ted, face to face, "Have you done these things people are saying you've done?" Ted kneeling down, looking at Molly. He said, "Of course I haven't. They're just lies." For a short time, unbelievably, like nothing has happened, Ted is living with Liz in her home, cooking, cleaning, sleeping in the same bed as Liz, playing with Molly, the neighborhood children, and talking about their future together, and that of course he'll win the trial coming up. But as the story would go, Ted would be taken back to Colorado, facing trial, to eventually to escaping out of a courthouse library, to several days later being caught again, and then in December of 1977 escaping again from jail. Ted is on the run, eventually arriving in Florida and living there for a little bit of time, stealing credit cards from students and living in a small boarding house with other people. Ted eventually murders 3 more people, to where he's finally caught and sent to prison in Florida. And this is where the story of Ted's love life takes an even more dramatic turn, to where he gets what he always wanted, a complete family, where he's the father, having a wife, a daughter, and a stepson. When Ted is on trial in Florida for the sorority murders he committed, the whole world is watching. Ted tries to defend himself, also flaunting himself and capturing the attention of many women that come from all over the country to see him. It's really the first time we see a serial killer, someone that's been accused of horrific murders, that have groupies inside and outside the courthouse. It's said that Ted is flooded with letters from women showing pictures of themselves in all kinds of manners, trying to become Ted's new girlfriend. At this point, Liz has tried to break away as much as she can from Ted, but still, Ted tries to contact Liz during his first trial, but Liz, she ignores Ted and tries to move on with her life. After a long trial, it's obvious that things are not going well for Ted. He's losing his case, and in the first set of murders in Florida, he's convicted guilty. Ted goes right back to court, being accused of the murder of Kimberly Leach, his last victim. This is where we see Carol Boone come into the picture and into the spotlight for everyone to see. She's back in Ted's life, doing televised interviews by herself or even with Ted's family, saying that she's good friends with Ted, and that's all they need to know at the moment. But the most important thing, that she's one of Ted's biggest allies, pleading his innocence. Carol's in the courtroom every day while Ted is trying to defend himself. Carol's asked to sit on the stand, expressing that Ted was innocent and that he was a good person, but it was quite obvious that Ted and Boone were already romantically involved and had been for quite some time. So in the middle of a 12-year-old's trial that Ted kidnapped from her school and murdered her, he used the opportunity to propose to Carol, and Carol graciously accepted. It was the only positive point for Ted in the whole trial. The rest of it, he lost his anger and was found guilty and sentenced to death. But the story continues with Ted for another 10 years. As Ted is trying to get a new trial, he will see Carol as much as he can and start to have conjugal visits with her, paying off guards. Carol becomes pregnant, and Ted, making his own rules again as the killer, convicted in prison on death row, will have a baby from prison while sitting in prison. Carol will give birth to a baby girl who Ted is 100% the biological father of, and acting as a stepfather to Carol's older son. Ted and Carol are together for quite a while into the 80s, Carol visiting as much as she can, letting Ted hold and play with his daughter, and Carol all the while still pleading and believing that Ted is completely innocent of everything he's been convicted of. Right before the last few years of Ted's life, he's getting closer to meeting his end, to where one point, Ted will tell Carol, "I think I'm just going to start confessing to things, so it'll start buying me more time." Carol completely unaware of what Ted was talking about, because in no way did she think that Ted was guilty. All we know that Carol was completely upset and immediately filed for divorce from Ted and moved away, far away, and never really talked about the situation ever again. She just raised her children, changed her name, and lived to be an old woman, passing a few years back. Right before Ted went to his first big trial in Florida, he did have a conversation with Liz, where Liz herself was fed up with taking up for Ted and pleading his innocence. So she told Ted, "I know what's going on, and I want you to tell me that you've done these things." Ted took a big gasp, almost whispering, and in his own way, saying that he had a problem and that he couldn't go into it, but in so many words confessing to Liz, and probably the first person he ever confessed to until the week of his death, that he was guilty. Through Ted's relationship with Liz and Molly, it's confirmed that Ted murdered 30 women, but many more think around 50 from women that Ted is still connected to this day, from where they disappeared, or to a man by the name of Ted they were talking to before they disappeared. While Ted spends the last few years in prison, even up to his execution date, there's heavy rumors that Ted has relationships from time to time with women, from visits, even an attorney that was trying to help Ted at the time. Maybe in another alternate universe, there's a Ted Bundy that stayed straight, that didn't have urges to kidnap women, and that became a lawyer, and had many children with Liz, and raised Molly to see her become a woman. As for Ted's daughter, the only child we know that Ted Bundy had, her whereabouts have always been unknown. She has no interest in the public, talking to them, or letting them know who she is, and it's probably for good reason. It's said that she has a family with children, which means Ted would have been a grandfather. She's changed her name and living amongst us with her children. As for Ted and his love life, who knows what other rumors may come out in the future of what Ted has done, of who, when, and where Ted was with romantically.